Okay, so this isn't what I normally do. I normally do game reviews, and there will be another review, hopefully, fingers crossed, next month. But for now, I want to talk about Toy Story 4. Now, where to begin? How about going back to the beginning to 1995? Disney Pixar's Toy Story is one of those movies that's really hard to criticize. The animation may look pretty dated now, but for its time this was state of the art, and the fact that it remains one of the greatest animated flicks of all time speaks volumes. This was more than just the first feature-length computer animated movie. It has heart, humor, and so many memorable and diverse characters. Sure, there are some plot holes we could talk about, but they can be easily overlooked as the movie remains consistently engaging. Now, Toy Story 2 is not my favorite entry in the franchise, but I think if you were to claim it's the best of the movies, I still think it's fairly justifiable. Despite being a sequel, this movie isn't too reliant on the previous movie to captivate its audience. The story is compelling enough on its own, and it tackles some pretty weighty themes that were left untouched by the previous movie. I only have some minor complaints about Toy Story 3. Firstly, the Buzz Lightyear thinking he's a real space ranger trope has gotten old. In the first movie, it was a major character flaw and a crucial aspect of the movie, while in the second, it paved the way for some additional drama and humorous scenes, but by this point, to me, it just feels like we're going through the motions. Even the toys themselves seem fed up with this plot device.
Oh boy.
Additionally, while the Spanish mode does allow for some more comedy, it feels a little, I don't know, corny to me? Maybe I'm just being nitpicky here, I don't know. The ending too feels a bit too schmaltzy for my tastes. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for emotional scenes. I bore my eyes out at the opening montage of Up every single time. But there's a very fine line between emotional and cringe-inducing, and here I'm really sorry to say this, but I cringe every single time. Particularly this final line from Andy to his toys.
Thanks, guys.
In my opinion, mere silence would have made the scene far more impactful. But ultimately, despite my small complaints, Toy Story 3 rounds off the series near perfectly. One might argue that Toy Story 3 heralds a new age of lesser movies and sequels for Pixar, while someone else could easily argue that Toy Story 3 marks the last of Pixar's original winning streak of movies. To be completely honest, I think both arguments are justifiable to an extent. The movie is indisputably enjoyable, but I have to say I'm more inclined to see it as an indication of a decline rather than the studio's swan song. Why is this? Well, this is a little complicated to explain. Do I think Toy Story 3 is a good movie? Absolutely! Personally, I love it, and actually prefer it to Toy Story 2. But then, thinking about the movie from a critical perspective, I think Toy Story 2 is indisputably the better movie. This may sound a little convoluted or nonsensical to some of you, but there is a major difference between liking something personally and viewing something objectively from a critical standpoint. While Toy Story 2 is indeed a sequel, it's also highly original. Themes of loss, longevity, and abandonment are prevalent in this movie. Woody fears Andy growing up and losing interest in him, thus reinforcing his inner conflict later on in the movie, which sees him vacillate between staying with the Roundup gang and returning home. In fact, Jesse's primary purpose in this movie is to embody all that Woody fears, and to influence his decision to stay behind. Now, this might sound pretty stupid, as I don't know why anyone would watch a sequel without having seen the original movie, but hear me out a second. Toy Story 2 is a great sequel because you can follow and become heavily invested in the plot and the characters without requiring any prior knowledge of the characters or previous movie. This is where Toy Story 3 differs in my opinion. The third installment relies pretty heavily on the former movies to generate an emotional nostalgic response, and there are also some very similar compositions to the ones from the previous installments. Listen to this scene from Toy Story 3. Now listen to this one from Toy Story 2. Note the similarities. Not only that, but despite building on the intensity of the previous movies, it actually offers very little new content, in the sense that it handles the exact same themes as Toy Story 2. Sure, the intensity is heightened substantially, but I think it's interesting to note that a few of the events of the third movie are referenced in Toy Story 2. For example, one scene posits, would Andy take Woody to college? While Stinky Pete's tirade foreshadows the toy's potential future rotting in some landfill, which we get a glimpse of in the climactic moments of the trilogy. On the whole, however, despite the third movie's heavy reliance on nostalgia, I'd say the original Toy Story trilogy is near flawless. Then, Toy Story 4 arrived. Oh boy! Since trailers first emerged in anticipation of this movie, I've been understandably apprehensive, considering the high quality the trilogy maintained. But nonetheless, I decided to give it the benefit of the doubt. In a world where toys, and even sporks apparently, come to life, there's a whole realm of as of yet unexplored possibilities. I'll be blunt. My first feeling upon leaving the cinema was legitimately this. What the fuck was that? I really don't know where to begin with this, but I will say this. Here be spoilers, so if you haven't seen it yet, watch your step. Let's get the obvious out of the way, shall we? First, let's talk about Bo. Now, I don't care what people say about her tragic backstory, her having become a lost toy, justifying her change in character. The fact is, she looks and acts nothing like she did in the first two movies. Some might say you knew little about her in the first place, and that's true, but everything about her, her demeanor, her manner of speaking, her character, or what little we saw of it anyway, is completely disregarded in this movie. Some may ask why this is a problem when the character is well-rounded enough in this movie alone, but for me it contradicted the movie's conclusion. I found it really hard to believe that Woody would want to stay with her. She's all rough and tough and, well, clearly independent now, and evidently has a completely contrasting perspective to him. There wasn't much chemistry between them for me, and that really served to make the ending extremely bewildering. Also, I have a major problem with her physical prowess. She's fragile for crying out loud. In the first two movies, she moved delicately like you'd imagine a porcelain doll to move. Here, she moves more like a rag doll, like Jessie. Sure, the animation gives her that porcelain sheen, but I don't know, she didn't seem believably fragile to me. It's just not in her nature to be so agile. I got the impression that we're trying to do away with her overtly feminine, meek and mild persona, but this was far better suited to her for reasons that transcend gender stereotyping. Let's not forget that feminine personas exist after all. If they wanted a so-called strong female character in an action role, they already had Jessie. Why completely change somebody else? Heck, all Jessie manages to accomplish in this movie is puncture a car tire. Fascinating. But Bo isn't the worst character here for me. That title goes to Buzz. Seriously, what the bloody hell did they do to him in this movie? There is nothing to him besides this running joke, if you can call it that, revolving around him listening to his inner voice. It's tired, unfunny, and it's just dumb. Seriously, this is Buzz fucking Lightyear, one of the main characters of the Toy Story franchise, and he's reduced to being a big, stupid, dumbass comic foil. I'm not saying dumb guys don't exist. Trust me, I know. I've dated many. But this is fucking Buzz Lightyear. We've known him for 24 years. He's better than this. What happened to him? Did his reset back in the last movie cause him to lose a few brain cells? It genuinely feels like someone at Pixar was handed these characters and forced to make a story out of them without actually knowing who they are. And that leads me to talk about Woody. This is not Woody. In this movie, his morals seem a little all over the place. As usual, he starts out preaching what it means to be a toy, to be loyal to your kid, etc. His objective throughout the movie is to retrieve Forky, Bonnie's makeshift toy, simply to make her happy. But by the end, he decides, you know what, it's time to move on and leave Bonnie and the other toys. I get the message it's trying to convey, but it just doesn't sit right with me. Why? It completely contradicts Woody's character. In Toy Story 2, we saw him threaten to leave Andy's house for a museum in Japan, and he's stopped in his tracks by Buzz, who reminds him of his purpose. By comparison, this movie's ending is frankly horrible. Woody chooses in a split second to leave behind all his friends in favor of joining forces with some Bo Peep imposter. Wow! So many years of character development just thrown out the window. Remember the end of the third movie?
But the thing that makes Woody special is he'll never give up on you.
Well, to hell with all that then, cause Woody's pissed off. This movie also lacks that warm, familiar vibe maintained by the other Toy Story movies. The new characters just don't sit right with me. Ducky and Bunny are okay, I guess. I feel like I'm in the minority here, but I didn't actually find them all that amusing. Some of the longer skits, like the plush rush scene everyone's been raving about, just felt like needless filler material. Ducky and Bunny's character arc seemed to go nowhere too. They started out yearning to be one for kids to play with them, but by the end of the movie, nothing really changed for them. I don't really know why they were there in the first place. And don't get me started on Giggle McDimples. She is beyond irritating and serves no purpose whatsoever to the narrative. She's just annoying and that's the end of it. And while we're talking about some of the movie's more trivial moments, I'd just like to say the name of Bo's sheep annoyed me to death. Why in God's name would she call them Billy, Goat and Gruff? They're sheep, not goats. I know it's meant to be a pun of sorts, but it doesn't work. It's just lazy writing. And speaking of lazy writing, there are just too many contrivances in this film. The human characters are, for want of better phrasing, thick as shit. Okay, so in Toy Story, Woody chases after a moving van in broad daylight, and in Toy Story 2, the toys manage to drive a Pizza Planet truck. These instances do require some suspension of disbelief, but here, the toys manage to take control of Bonnie's parents' RV by having Trixie the Triceratops pretend to be a sat-nav. Really? Really? There are other moments in the movie where the toys come dangerously close to getting caught, and it borders on ridiculous. I mean, I know it's a movie about toys coming to life, but it still requires some degree of realism for the viewer to become invested. I had the exact same problem with Finding Dory. Okay, so Finding Nemo is about talking fish. Fine. But now you're expecting me to believe an octopus is driving a lorry? Oh, piss off. Your audience isn't as stupid as your latest incarnation of Buzz, Pixar. Now I just want to briefly talk about the so-called villain in this movie, Gabby. Now, upon meeting her and her ventriloquist dummy henchman for the first time, we instantly get the impression she's going to be the major antagonist. I've heard comments from other reviewers saying that they appreciated that she isn't your run-of-the-mill typical villain. She doesn't pull any nasty surprises. She merely yearns for something she's always deserved but has never attained because she's broken. She's sort of sinister, I guess, but ultimately she becomes a character with whom the audience is expected to empathize, which is fine. But the problem I had with this is that she's not remotely memorable as a result. She meets Woody and demands his voice box, and then later he gives her his voice box, and that's kind of it. Some people seem to see this as an admirable quality. I mean, I guess she's not identical to the last two villains, who are essentially the same, but she doesn't really do anything, and for me personally, it did nothing else but make the movie horribly anticlimactic. Speaking of which, that ending has to be one of the worst endings I've ever seen in a Pixar movie. Woody's character seems to take a pretty dramatic U-turn. For a good 3/4 of the movie, he has his heart set on loyalty and returning Forky to Bonnie to make her happy, which he does. Then suddenly he decides to leave all of his friends for Bo in a really strange rushed final scene completely devoid of emotion. There's no objection from anybody, no big speech from Buzz like in Toy Story 2, no emotional begging from Bullseye. Woody's just useless and unwanted now, apparently. I watched this scene in disbelief. Woody has been faced with the threat of obsolescence before a few times. Way back in the first Toy Story, his position as a favorite toy was temporarily usurped by Buzz Lightyear, a really cool toy. And then despite Andy's growing up, he's stayed with him till the bitter end. Now he's been replaced by a spork and he's calling it quits? Lame. What the hell have they done? Can we just pretend this movie didn't happen? I've seen all these rave reviews, even on IMDb, whose user reviews can often be seriously unforgiving and unjust when it comes to latter-day Pixar movies. This movie is currently being praised no end. Did we see the same fucking movie? At best, this movie is mediocre, but compared to the previous 3 films, this is a travesty. With this movie, Pixar not only went to infinity and beyond, they went too far. I like to think I'm not the only one who felt the same. Whether you agree or not, thanks for watching, everyone. I'll be back next month with a game review. If you'd like to see more videos like this, let me know, and also remember to like and subscribe and give us a like on social media. Bye bye for now.